The wrench slipped from my grease-stained fingers as I heard those words echo from the kitchen above my auto shop. 10:30 on a Tuesday night, and I'm underneath a 1967 Mustang trying to rebuild an engine that's seen better decades. That's when Jovie's mother decided to make her grand announcement. "Jovie, darling, take the $1 million. You deserve better than this mechanic. Divorce him and move on." Porter Kellor, that's me, 39 years old, owner of Kellor's Classic Auto Restoration, and apparently worth exactly $1 million to get rid of. Not bad for a guy who started with nothing but a toolbox and a dream. I stayed under that car, listening to the conversation unfold above me like some twisted soap opera. The floorboards in this old building are thin, and sound travels better than gossip in a small town. "Mother, you can't be serious," Jovie said, but her voice carried that calculating tone I'd learned to recognize over 15 years of marriage. She wasn't shocked. She was negotiating. "Serious, sweetheart. $1 million cash deposited into your personal account tomorrow morning. All you have to do is sign the papers and walk away from this." Mrs. Eleanor Kincaid paused, and I could picture her manicured hand gesturing dismissively at my life's work. This situation. Jovie Kellor, my wife, mother of my daughter, the woman who used to laugh at my terrible jokes and steal fries from my plate, took exactly 3 seconds to consider the offer. "I'll take it." Those 3 words hit me harder than the time I dropped a transmission on my foot. No hesitation. No, "let me think about it." No, "what about Porter?" Just cold, calculated acceptance. I rolled out from under the Mustang and wiped my hands on an old shop rag, processing what I'd just heard. 15 years of marriage, reduced to a business transaction. Our daughter Leah, currently at a sleepover, would wake up tomorrow to a very different world. The footsteps above moved toward what used to be our bedroom, now apparently just Jovie's temporary quarters until she could upgrade to something more suitable for a $1 million divorce settlement. I climbed the narrow stairs that connected my shop to our small apartment above it. The place wasn't much to look at. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that doubled as a dining room, and a living area filled with mismatched furniture. But it was ours. Or at least, I thought it was. Jovie sat at our kitchen table with a stack of legal documents spread before her like tarot cards predicting my future. Her mother stood behind her, perfectly coiffed even at this late hour, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Eleanor Kincaid looked at me with the same expression she might reserve for something unpleasant she'd stepped in. "Porter, we were just discussing Jovie's future." "Our future," I corrected, pulling out a chair and sitting down uninvited at my own table. "Last I checked, we were still married." Jovie finally looked up from the papers. Her green eyes, the same ones that used to light up when I walked into a room, were cold as winter morning. "Not for long." She picked up a pen, one of those expensive ones her law firm gave out to important clients, and signed her name with the same flourish she used on birthday cards. The ink was still wet when she slid the documents across the table. "It's already done, Porter. Mother's attorney drew up everything yesterday. No-fault divorce, clean split. You keep the shop, I keep my career, and we both move on with our lives." I scanned the papers, noting the official letterhead from Kincaid, Morrison and Associates, the same law firm where Jovie worked as a corporate attorney. Convenient how these things work out when your family owns the business. "What about Leah?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Joint custody," Eleanor interjected before Jovie could respond. "Weekends and holidays. Very standard arrangement." Standard. Like our daughter was a timeshare property to be divided up between interested parties. Jovie stood and smoothed down her skirt, a designer piece that cost more than most people's car payments. "I'll be staying at Mother's house until I find something more suitable. The papers give you 30 days to adjust to the new arrangement." "How generous," I said, letting sarcasm drip from every syllable. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Jovie replied, gathering the signed documents. "We both know this marriage has been over for months. This just makes it official." She wasn't wrong about that part. The distance between us had been growing like rust on an old bumper, slow at first, then spreading until it consumed everything. Late nights at the office, weekend conferences, business trips that seemed to multiply like rabbits. I'd noticed, but I'd been too busy keeping my business afloat to address it properly. Eleanor pulled out her phone and made a quick call. "Harold? Yes, it's done. Transfer the funds first thing tomorrow morning." She ended the call and smiled at Jovie like she'd just won the lottery. "Congratulations, darling. Your new life starts now." They left together, Jovie carrying a small suitcase she must have packed earlier. No goodbye hug, no final kiss, no acknowledgement of the 15 years we'd spent building something together. Just the click of expensive heels on my shop floor and the sound of a luxury car starting up outside. I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the divorce papers and trying to process what had just happened. $1 million. That's what it took to erase me from Jovie's life. Part of me was impressed by the efficiency of it all. But here's the thing about being a mechanic. You learn to look deeper than surface problems. When an engine makes a strange noise, you don't just turn up the radio. You investigate. You find the source. You fix what's broken, even if it means tearing apart something that looks fine from the outside. And right now, my marriage wasn't the only thing making strange noises. I walked downstairs to my office, a cramped space behind the main shop floor where I kept customer files, invoices, and other business paperwork. Hidden behind a stack of parts catalogs was something I'd discovered 6 months ago, but never had the courage to confront. A key to a safety deposit box that didn't belong to either of our banks. Jovie had dropped it one evening when she came home from work. I'd picked it up, meaning to return it, but something about her nervous reaction when I mentioned finding something made me curious. A quick trip to the bank revealed it belonged to a box registered under her maiden name at a branch across town. The box contained documents I wasn't supposed to see. Financial records showing money transfers I didn't know about. Property deeds for investments we'd never discussed. And most interesting of all, a sealed envelope labeled prenatal records with a date from 26 years ago. I'd photographed everything with my phone and returned the key to Jovie's purse, but I'd never forgotten what I'd seen, especially that envelope. The date corresponded with Jovie's birth, but something about the way it was sealed and stored separately from other family documents struck me as odd. Now, sitting in my office at nearly midnight, I pulled up those photos on my phone and studied them again. Eleanor Kincaid had just paid $1 million to get me out of her daughter's life. But what if I had information that would make that investment worthless? The prenatal records were the key. I was certain of it. But I needed more than photographs of a sealed envelope to do anything useful. I needed the actual contents, and I needed independent verification of whatever I might find. I grabbed my laptop and started researching private investigators in the area. If Jovie wanted to play hardball with family money and legal documents, I could play too, but I'd be playing to win. By 2 a.m, I'd made my first move. I sent an email to a private investigator named Yolanda Martinez, whose website promised discreet, thorough, and results-oriented service. I attached the photos from the safety deposit box and requested a consultation. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey and toasted my empty kitchen. "To new beginnings," I said, echoing Eleanor's earlier words. But unlike her, I meant something entirely different. The next morning would bring lawyers, bank transfers, and the official start of my divorce proceedings. But tonight was mine. Tonight was for planning. And tomorrow, the Kincaid family would learn that Porter Kellor wasn't nearly as simple as they thought. 3 days after Jovie signed those papers, I met Yolanda Martinez at a diner on the outskirts of town. She looked exactly like someone who'd spent 20 years as a police detective before going private. Sharp eyes, no-nonsense attitude, and the kind of confidence that comes from seeing every possible variation of human stupidity. "Your wife's family has money," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Real money, the kind that makes problems disappear and creates new realities when convenient." I sipped my coffee, noting how she'd said wife instead of ex-wife. Technically accurate, since the divorce wouldn't be final for another few weeks, but it felt strange hearing it from someone who understood the situation. "Tell me something I don't know," I replied. Yolanda opened a manila folder and spread several documents across the table between us. "Eleanor Kincaid has been planning this divorce for at least 6 months. The paperwork was drawn up in February, just waiting for the right moment to execute." That stung more than I expected. February was when Jovie started working late every night, claiming a big case required her full attention. Apparently, the big case was ending our marriage. "What about those prenatal records?" I asked. "That's where things get interesting." Yolanda pulled out a medical file with several pages of documentation. "I have contacts at the clinic where these records originated. Took some persuading, but I managed to get copies of the relevant documents." She handed me a laboratory report dated 26 years ago. The technical language was dense, but the summary was clear enough. Genetic testing performed during pregnancy, with results indicating potential paternity complications. "Jovie's mother had this testing done when she was pregnant," Yolanda explained. "Back then, it wasn't standard procedure unless there was a specific reason to question paternity." I studied the document more carefully. "What kind of reason?" "The kind that involves Eleanor Kincaid having an affair with someone other than her husband." The pieces started falling into place like parts of an engine I'd been rebuilding for months. Eleanor's desperate need to get me out of the picture. Her willingness to pay $1 million to ensure Jovie's divorce went through quickly and quietly. The way she'd always treated me like an unwelcome intruder in their family circle. "Do these records prove Jovie isn't Harold Kincaid's daughter?" I asked. "They suggest it strongly, but we'd need current DNA samples to confirm anything definitively." Yolanda leaned back in her seat. "However, I did some additional digging into the Kincaid family medical history." She pulled out another document, this one from a fertility clinic. "Harold Kincaid was diagnosed with a condition that makes natural conception extremely unlikely. The diagnosis was made 2 years before Jovie was born." I felt something shift in my chest, not satisfaction exactly, but the recognition that I'd found the loose thread that could unravel everything. "How did Eleanor explain Jovie's birth?" "Miracle of modern medicine. Fertility treatments, hormone therapy, the works. Harold was so thrilled to finally have a child that he never questioned the details." The waitress refilled our coffee cups, giving us a curious look. We probably appeared to be discussing something far more mundane than the potential destruction of one of the area's most prominent families. "What do you need from me to move forward?" I asked. Yolanda smiled, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I had an ally. "Access to DNA samples from both Harold and Jovie. Medical records, hair samples, anything that can provide genetic material for comparison. Harold's medical files are probably locked down tighter than Fort Knox." "Maybe, but he's been seeing the same family physician for 30 years. Dr. Robert Chen keeps meticulous records, and he's not particularly fond of the Kincaid family's attitude toward medical privacy." I raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning Eleanor has a history of demanding special treatment and threatening lawsuits when she doesn't get her way. Dr. Chen might be willing to cooperate with a legitimate paternity investigation, especially if it's presented through proper legal channels." The plan was starting to take shape. I had information that could potentially destroy Eleanor's carefully constructed family narrative. But I needed solid proof before making any moves. Accusations without evidence would just make me look like a bitter ex-husband trying to cause trouble. "How long will this take?" I asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we run into complications. But Porter..." Yolanda's expression turned serious. Once we start this process, there's no going back. If these records prove what we think they prove, it will destroy more than just your marriage. I thought about Jovie, signing those divorce papers without a moment's hesitation. I thought about Eleanor's smug satisfaction as she orchestrated my removal from their lives. I thought about my daughter Leah, who would grow up believing her mother's family was something it wasn't. "Do it," I said. We shook hands across the table, and Yolanda gathered her documents. "I'll be in touch within a few days. In the meantime, act normal. Don't give them any reason to suspect you're investigating anything." Acting normal turned out to be easier than expected. Jovie had moved into her mother's mansion on the other side of town, and our only contact was brief text messages about Leah's schedule. The shop kept me busy during the day, and evenings were spent helping my daughter adjust to the new reality of split custody. Leah took the divorce news better than I'd expected, but she was 15 and had probably seen it coming long before the official announcement. She spent weeknights at Eleanor's house with Jovie and weekends with me at the shop. "Mom seems different," she told me one Saturday morning while I worked on the Mustang. "Happier, I guess, but also kind of nervous." "Nervous how?" "Like she's waiting for something bad to happen. She keeps checking her phone and looking out the windows. Grandma Eleanor is the same way." Interesting. Maybe they weren't as confident in their $1,000,000 solution as they wanted to appear. 2 weeks later, Yolanda called with an update. "We got lucky. Dr. Chen was more cooperative than expected, and Harold's medical records going back 30 years are now part of our investigation file." And you're going to want to see this in person. Can you meet me at my office this afternoon? Yolanda's office was located in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. Not exactly prestigious, but the interior was professional and organized. She had the DNA comparison results spread across her desk like evidence in a criminal trial. "The results are conclusive," she said without preamble. "Harold Kincaid is not Jovie's biological father. The genetic markers don't match, and the probability of paternity is less than 1%. I stared at the laboratory report, processing the implications. Who is her father? That's where things get complicated. The prenatal records from 26 years ago list a potential father as J. Morrison, which happens to be Eleanor's maiden name. Her brother? Her cousin, James Morrison, who was Eleanor's law partner before Harold bought into the firm and it became Kincaid, Morrison, and Associates. James died in a car accident 15 years ago, but his genetic profile is on file from a previous paternity case. The picture was becoming clearer. Eleanor had an affair with her cousin, got pregnant, and convinced Harold the child was his. When James died, the secret seemed safe forever. But DNA evidence doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. "What's our next move?" I asked. Yolanda handed me a sealed envelope. Certified copies of all the genetic testing, medical records, and chain of custody documentation. Everything you need to present this information through legal channels. I held the envelope, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to contain the power to destroy a family's entire foundation. "Porter, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Once you present this evidence, there's no taking it back. Jovie will lose her inheritance. Harold will learn his wife betrayed him in the worst possible way, and your daughter will discover her entire family history is built on lies." I thought about that for a long moment. Then I thought about Jovie's cold dismissal of our marriage, Eleanor's smug satisfaction, and the casual way they'd decided I was worth exactly $1,000,000 to remove from their lives. "Schedule a meeting with Harold's attorney," I said. "It's time the Kincaid family learned the truth about their perfect daughter." Harold Kincaid's attorney, Richard Westbrook, had an office that screamed old money and older traditions. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound legal volumes, and a view of the city that reminded visitors exactly how high up the food chain they were dealing with. When I walked in carrying Yolanda's envelope, I felt like David approaching Goliath's lawyer. "Mr. Kellor," Westbrook said, gesturing to a chair across from his massive desk. "I understand you have some information relevant to the Kincaid family interests. I'd called ahead, requesting a meeting to discuss newly discovered documents pertaining to family medical history and inheritance rights. Legal language designed to get attention without revealing specifics. I have genetic testing results that I believe Mr. Kincaid should review personally," I said, placing the sealed envelope on his desk. Westbrook studied me with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent 40 years protecting wealthy families from inconvenient truths. "What type of genetic testing?" "Paternity verification, conducted by an independent laboratory using archived medical samples and current DNA comparison protocols." His expression didn't change, but I noticed his fingers tighten slightly around his pen. "Mr. Kellor, if you're attempting to create leverage for your divorce proceedings—" "Open the envelope," I interrupted. "Review the documentation. Then tell me if this looks like a leverage play." Westbrook broke the seal and spread the contents across his desk. I watched his face as he processed the laboratory reports, medical records, and chain of custody documentation. His professional composure cracked slightly when he reached the paternity probability statistics. "Where did you obtain these medical records?" he asked. "Through legitimate investigative channels, with proper legal authorization. Everything in that folder was acquired legally and can be independently verified." He spent another 10 minutes reviewing the documentation, making notes and cross-referencing dates. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted from skeptical to deeply concerned. "Mr. Kellor, these results suggest that Harold Kincaid is not Jovie's biological father. Are you prepared to stake your reputation on the accuracy of this information?" "I'm prepared to stake everything on it." Westbrook gathered the documents and placed them back in the envelope. "I'll need to review this with Mr. Kincaid privately. However, I must advise you that presenting false paternity claims is a serious legal matter." "I understand. I also understand that concealing paternity fraud for 26 years is an equally serious matter." He stood, indicating the meeting was over. "I'll be in contact within 48 hours. In the meantime, I trust you'll keep this information confidential." "Of course. Family privacy is important." I left his office feeling like I'd just lit a very long fuse on a very large explosive. The next 2 days would determine whether my investigation destroyed the Kincaid family or backfired and destroyed me instead. I didn't have to wait 48 hours. Westbrook called the next afternoon while I was rebuilding a carburetor on a 1969 Camaro. "Mr. Kellor, Harold Kincaid would like to meet with you this evening, 8 o'clock at his home office. Come alone and bring any additional documentation you might have." Harold Kincaid's house was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 30 years building a successful law practice. Stately colonial architecture, perfectly manicured grounds, and the kind of understated elegance that whispers wealth instead of shouting it. He met me at the front door personally, which surprised me. In 15 years of marriage to his supposed daughter, Harold had always maintained a polite but distant relationship with me. Tonight, he looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 24 hours. "Porter," he said, shaking my hand with more warmth than he'd ever shown before. "Thank you for coming. We have much to discuss." His home office was smaller than Westbrook's, but more personal. Family photographs covered one wall. Pictures of Harold and Eleanor's wedding, Jovie's childhood milestones, holiday gatherings, and professional achievements. All the memories of a life built on a fundamental lie. "Richard showed me your documentation," Harold said, settling into a leather chair across from me. "I've spent the day having it independently verified by our own medical consultants." And it appears my wife has been lying to me for 26 years. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to catch. Harold looked older than his 62 years, worn down by the weight of discovering that his entire adult life had been constructed around deception. I need to understand something, Porter. Why are you showing me this now? You could have used this information to complicate your divorce, demand a larger settlement, or create leverage for custody arrangements. Instead, you're giving it to me directly. Why? I'd been asking myself the same question since leaving Westbrook's office. The honest answer was complicated, involving hurt pride, genuine anger, and a desire to see justice served. But sitting across from Harold, seeing the pain in his eyes, I found a simpler truth. Because you deserved to know, because Jovie and Eleanor made decisions about my life based on money and social status, but they built those decisions on lies, and because sometimes the truth matters more than strategy. Harold nodded slowly. I've been reviewing my medical records from the fertility clinic. The doctors told us that natural conception was extremely unlikely given my condition, but not impossible. When Eleanor became pregnant, we celebrated it as a miracle. Did you ever suspect? Never. Eleanor was convincing. She seemed as surprised and delighted as I was. And Jovie looked enough like Eleanor's family that physical resemblance never raised questions. He stood and walked to the wall of family photographs, studying them with new eyes. James Morrison was Eleanor's cousin and my law partner. He was also my best friend. We built this firm together from nothing. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. Don't apologize for telling the truth. Apologize for what people do with lies. He turned back to face me. What do you want from this information, Porter? I want Eleanor's $1 million bribe returned to your accounts. I want the divorce settlement voided based on fraudulent family circumstances. And I want Jovie to understand that actions have consequences. Harold was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. If I act on this information, it will destroy more than just Eleanor and Jovie. It will destroy the firm, our family reputation, and probably several business partnerships built on personal relationships. That's not my problem anymore. No, he agreed. It's mine. But Porter, I want you to understand something. If I move forward with this, there's no going back. Eleanor will lose everything. Jovie will lose her inheritance, her position at the firm, and her social standing. Your daughter will grow up knowing her family history is built on lies and betrayal. I thought about Leah, currently doing homework at Eleanor's mansion while her mother and grandmother planned a future that assumed I would quietly disappear. I thought about the casual way they'd calculated my worth and found it lacking. I thought about 15 years of marriage dismissed with a signature and a bank transfer. Harold, they made their choices when they decided I was worth exactly $1 million to remove from their lives. Now they get to live with the consequences of those choices. He nodded, and I saw something shift in his expression. The pain was still there, but it was joined by something harder and more determined. Richard will file for annulment tomorrow morning based on fraud and misrepresentation. All family accounts will be frozen pending resolution of paternity claims. Eleanor's power of attorney over family assets will be revoked immediately. What about Jovie's divorce settlement? Voided. You can't inherit from a family you don't legally belong to, and you can't use fraudulent family assets to fund divorce settlements. We shook hands again, but this time it felt like a partnership rather than a polite formality. Harold Kincaid had just learned that his entire adult life was built on his wife's lies, and he was choosing to do something about it. One more thing, Porter. I want you to know that regardless of what happens with Eleanor and Jovie, you'll always be welcome in Leah's life. She's the only family I have left that's real. I left Harold's house knowing that I'd just set in motion events that would destroy the Kincaid family as completely as they'd tried to destroy my marriage. The difference was that my destruction would be based on truth instead of money. Tomorrow, Eleanor and Jovie would wake up to a very different world than the one they'd gone to sleep in. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I was looking forward to seeing their reactions. The next morning started like any other Thursday, until Harold Kincaid walked into his law firm's main conference room at exactly 9 o'clock and dropped a legal bombshell that would be talked about for years. I wasn't there to witness it personally, but Yolanda had contacts throughout the legal community, and news traveled fast when one of the city's most prominent families imploded in spectacular fashion. According to her sources, Harold called an emergency meeting with all senior partners, including Eleanor and Jovie. He walked in carrying a briefcase full of genetic testing results, medical records, and annulment paperwork that had been filed with the court an hour earlier. "I've discovered that my marriage to Eleanor is based on fraud," he announced without preamble. "Jovie is not my biological daughter, and I'm dissolving all family business relationships effective immediately." Eleanor, apparently, went completely pale and started stammering about misunderstandings and outdated medical records. Jovie demanded to see the evidence, then spent 20 minutes reviewing laboratory reports that conclusively proved her entire identity was built on lies. The other partners sat in stunned silence as Harold methodically explained how he'd learned about the deception, what legal steps he was taking, and how it would affect the firm's structure going forward. "Eleanor's ownership stake in this firm was acquired through our marriage," Harold continued. "Since that marriage was based on fraudulent representation, her partnership is void. Jovie's position as a senior associate was secured through family connections that don't legally exist. Both of their employment here is terminated immediately." That's when Eleanor apparently lost whatever composure she had left. According to witnesses, she started screaming about ungrateful husbands and demanding that Harold reconsider his rash decision. She threatened lawsuits, public scandal, and financial ruin. Harold's response was simple. "Eleanor, you've been lying to me for 26 years. Every decision I made, every sacrifice I accepted, every moment of happiness I felt was based on your deception. You don't get to threaten me anymore." Security escorted both women from the building within an hour. Their access cards were deactivated, their office contents were boxed up, and their names were removed from the firm directory before lunch. I learned all of this when Yolanda called me around noon with updates from her various sources throughout the legal community. "It gets better," she said. "Harold also froze all family accounts this morning. Eleanor's credit cards were declined when she tried to pay for lunch at that expensive restaurant downtown. Jovie's car payment bounced because it was tied to an account she no longer has access to. What about the $1 million divorce settlement? Gone. Harold's attorney filed paperwork with your divorce court explaining that the settlement was funded through fraudulent family assets. Since Jovie isn't legally entitled to Kincaid family money, she can't use it to pay divorce settlements." I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Genuine satisfaction. Not happiness exactly, but the deep contentment that comes from watching justice serve itself. "There's more," Yolanda continued. "Eleanor apparently called Harold's office this afternoon begging him to reconsider. She offered to return the $1 million and work things out if he would keep the paternity information private." "What did he tell her?" "He told her that some betrayals can't be fixed with money." Then he hung up and had his attorney send her formal divorce papers. By evening, the story was spreading through social circles like wildfire. The Kincaid family's fall from grace was too dramatic and too public to keep quiet. Eleanor's friends were distancing themselves, Jovie's professional reputation was in ruins, and Harold was being portrayed as either a victim or a hero, depending on who was telling the story. I was working late in my shop when Jovie showed up around 8 o'clock. She looked like someone who'd spent the day discovering that her entire life was a lie, which, technically, she had. "We need to talk," she said, walking into my workspace without invitation. I didn't stop working on the engine I was rebuilding. "About what?" "Our divorce is already finalized thanks to your mother's generous contribution." "Oh wait, that contribution doesn't exist anymore, does it?" "Porter, this is insane. You've destroyed my entire family over a divorce settlement. Was your pride really worth all this? I finally looked up from my work. Jovie was still beautiful, still perfectly dressed despite the circumstances, but there was something desperate in her eyes that I'd never seen before. I didn't destroy your family, Jovie. I just revealed what it really was. Your mother destroyed your family 26 years ago when she decided to build it on lies. Those genetic tests could be wrong. Medical science from 26 years ago wasn't as accurate as modern testing. The tests were conducted last week using current DNA samples and modern laboratory protocols. They're accurate. She sat down on a stool near my workbench, and for a moment, she looked like the woman I'd married 15 years ago. Vulnerable, uncertain, human. What do you want, Porter? Money? Property? An apology? Tell me what it will take to make this go away. It can't go away, Jovie. Truth doesn't disappear because it's inconvenient. But we could work something out. I could contest the annulment, demand my own genetic testing, challenge the court's decision to void our settlement. I put down my wrench and gave her my full attention. And then what? Even if you could prove you're entitled to Kincaid family money, which you can't, what kind of life would that be? Living off the wealth of a man who isn't your father, who your mother betrayed for decades? It's better than having nothing. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, nothing looks like an opportunity to build something real instead of something based on lies. Jovie was quiet for a long moment, processing the reality of her situation. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than I'd heard it in years. I'm scared, Porter. I don't know how to be anyone other than Eleanor Kincaid's daughter and Harold Kincaid's heir. I don't know how to start over with nothing. For just a moment, I felt sorry for her. She was a victim of her mother's choices, raised to believe she was entitled to wealth and status that were never rightfully hers. But then I remembered how quickly she'd signed those divorce papers, how easily she'd dismissed 15 years of marriage for $1 million payout. You'll figure it out, I said, returning to my work. People start over every day. Most of them don't have law degrees and 15 years of professional experience to build on. She stood to leave, then turned back one more time. What about Leah? What do I tell her about all this? Tell her the truth. Tell her that families are built on more than genetics and bank accounts. Tell her that integrity matters more than inheritance. And if she hates me for what my mother did, then you'll have to live with that. Just like I had to live with watching you choose money over our marriage. Jovie left without another word, and I went back to rebuilding the engine. There was something satisfying about taking apart something broken and putting it back together properly. Some things could be fixed if you had the right tools and the patience to do the work correctly. Other things, like marriages built on lies and families constructed around deception, couldn't be repaired. They had to be torn down completely before anything real could be built in their place. 3 weeks after Harold filed for annulment, the full scope of the Kincaid family's collapse became clear. Eleanor had moved into a small apartment across town, her social circle had evaporated, and she was facing multiple lawsuits from business partners who felt deceived by her fraudulent family status. Jovie was living in a studio apartment near downtown, working as a junior associate at a small firm that specialized in personal injury cases. The salary was less than half what she'd made at Kincaid, Morrison & Associates, and her professional reputation was still recovering from the scandal. Harold, meanwhile, had thrown himself into rebuilding his law practice and his life. He'd offered me a standing invitation to family dinners, which felt surreal but genuine. My daughter Leah was handling the family drama better than anyone expected, splitting her time between Harold's house, my apartment above the shop, and reluctant visits with Jovie and Eleanor. I thought the worst of it was over until Eleanor showed up at my shop on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, looking like someone who'd been fighting a war and losing badly. "Porter," she said, standing in my doorway like a defeated general requesting terms of surrender. "I need to speak with you." I gestured to a couple of chairs in my office area. curious about what Eleanor Kincaid could possibly want to discuss with me now that her $1 million solution had backfired so spectacularly. "I want to make a deal," she said without preamble. "What kind of deal?" "I'll give you $500,000 cash if you'll sign a statement saying the genetic testing was inconclusive and that you may have misinterpreted the results." I stared at her for a moment, processing the audacity of the offer. "Eleanor, you do realize that the genetic testing has already been independently verified by 3 separate laboratories, right? Harold's attorney made sure of that. Tests can be wrong, results can be challenged. If you recant your claims about Jovie's paternity, I can rebuild our family's reputation." "With what money?" "Harold froze all your accounts." Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. "I have resources, investments that Harold doesn't know about, money that I set aside over the years for emergencies." "Ah, so you've been hiding assets from your husband in addition to lying about your daughter's parentage. That's going to go over well in divorce court." "Porter, please. I'm begging you. Jovie is my daughter regardless of who her biological father was. She doesn't deserve to lose everything because of mistakes I made 26 years ago." I leaned back in my chair, studying the woman who'd orchestrated my divorce with such cold efficiency just weeks earlier. "Eleanor, do you remember what you told Jovie the night you offered her $1 million to divorce me?" "I don't see how that's relevant." "You told her she deserved better than a mechanic. You told her to take the money and move on with her life. You treated our marriage like a business transaction that could be dissolved with the right financial incentive." Eleanor's face flushed. "That was different. You and Jovie were clearly incompatible." "No, it wasn't different. You made a decision about other people's lives based on what you thought was best for your family's interests. Just like you made a decision 26 years ago to lie to Harold about Jovie's parentage because it served your interests. So what do you want? Revenge? Is that what this is about?" I stood up and walked to my office window, looking out at the rain falling on the parking lot. "I want you to understand something, Eleanor. I didn't destroy your family. Your choices destroyed your family. I just refused to let those choices destroy me too. But you could fix this. You could give us a chance to rebuild. Why should I? When Jovie signed those divorce papers, you both made it clear that I was worth exactly $1 million to remove from your lives. Now you're offering me half that amount to help you rebuild the lives you destroyed. What does that say about how you value integrity?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What can I do to make this right?" "Nothing. Some things can't be fixed, Eleanor. Some choices have permanent consequences. You lied to your husband for 26 years, you raised a daughter who isn't his, and you built a family fortune on deception. Those choices led directly to where you are now. And Jovie? She's innocent in all this. Jovie made her own choices. She chose money over marriage, status over integrity, and her mother's approval over her own family. She's dealing with the consequences of those choices just like you're dealing with yours." Eleanor stood to leave, looking older and more defeated than when she'd arrived. "I hope you're satisfied with what you've accomplished." "I'm satisfied with the truth finally being told. Everything else is just consequences." After she left, I called Harold to let him know about Eleanor's visit and her offer to bribe me into recanting my claims. "She's desperate," he said. "Her attorney called me yesterday with a similar proposal. She wants to settle the divorce quietly and avoid public disclosure of the paternity information." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that I'm not interested in protecting Eleanor's reputation at the expense of the truth. The genetic testing results will be part of the public divorce record, and anyone who wants to verify them is welcome to do so." "How are you holding up through all this?" Harold was quiet for a moment. "Better than I expected, actually. Learning the truth was devastating, but living with lies was worse. I feel like I can finally start building a life based on reality instead of deception. What about the law firm? We're restructuring. I'm buying out the remaining partners and starting fresh. It'll be smaller, but it'll be honest. That evening, Leah came to visit me at the shop. She'd been staying with Harold most nights since the family scandal broke, but she still spent time with me whenever her schedule allowed. "Dad," she said, settling into her usual spot on a stool near my workbench. "Can I ask you something about all this family drama?" "Of course. Do you ever feel bad about what happened to Mom and Grandma Eleanor? I mean, I know they made mistakes, but their whole lives fell apart." I put down my tools and gave her my full attention. This was the conversation I'd been dreading and preparing for since the night Jovie signed those divorce papers. "Leah, I feel bad that the situation happened at all. I wish your grandmother had made different choices 26 years ago. I wish your mother had made different choices 3 weeks ago. But I don't feel bad about refusing to let their choices destroy my life. But couldn't you have handled it differently? Maybe talk to them privately instead of involving lawyers and courts? I tried talking to your mother for months before any of this happened. I tried suggesting counseling, spending more time together, working on our problems. She chose to work late, take business trips, and eventually accept money to divorce me instead." Leah nodded slowly. "And Grandma Eleanor?" "Your grandmother offered your mother $1 million to get rid of me. She treated our marriage like a business problem that could be solved with the right financial incentive. When people show you who they really are, you should believe them." "So what happens now? With our family, I mean." I pulled up another stool and sat down next to her. "Now we figure out what family really means. Harold is still your grandfather, regardless of genetics. I'm still your father. Your mother is still your mother, even though she made some poor choices. We build relationships based on love and respect instead of money and status. What about Grandma Eleanor? That's up to you. She's your grandmother, and she loves you, but she also made choices that hurt a lot of people, and she'll have to live with the consequences of those choices." Leah was quiet for a moment, processing everything. "Dad, can I tell you something?" "Always." "I'm kind of proud of you for standing up for yourself. I know that sounds weird, but watching Mom and Grandma Eleanor treat you like you weren't important enough to matter, it made me angry." I hugged my daughter, feeling grateful that at least one good thing had come out of this whole mess. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you know." "Are you going to be okay? Financially, I mean, without the divorce settlement?" I laughed, surprising both of us. "Leah, I've been supporting this family on a mechanic's salary for 15 years. I think I can manage to support myself just fine. And maybe someday you'll find someone who appreciates what you have to offer instead of trying to change you into someone else. Maybe. But right now, I'm focused on rebuilding my life and being the best father I can be to you." We spent the rest of the evening working on the Mustang together, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like my family might actually be stronger than it was before, just smaller and more honest. 6 months after the Kincaid family scandal broke, life had settled into a new normal that felt more authentic than anything I'd experienced during my marriage. The divorce was finalized, the annulment was granted, and Eleanor's appeals had been rejected by every court that reviewed them. Harold had successfully restructured his law firm, keeping the best attorneys and clients while shedding the baggage of his fraudulent marriage. He'd also become an unexpected friend, someone who understood the value of starting over with truth instead of continuing with comfortable lies. Jovie was slowly rebuilding her career at the personal injury firm, though her income was a fraction of what she'd made at her family's practice. She'd moved into a better apartment and seemed to be adjusting to life without inherited wealth and social status. Eleanor had essentially disappeared from public view, living quietly in her small apartment and avoiding the social circles that had once defined her identity. The hidden assets she'd mentioned to me turned out to be less substantial than she'd claimed, and most of them were seized as part of the divorce settlement anyway. My auto restoration business was thriving. Word had spread about my role in exposing the Kincaid family deception, and while some people viewed me as a vindictive ex-husband, others saw me as someone who'd stood up for truth against wealth and privilege. The latter group included several new customers who appreciated both my mechanical skills and my integrity. I was working on a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda when Yolanda Martinez stopped by for what had become a monthly check-in. Our professional relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared appreciation for justice. "How's the family drama settling out?" she asked, settling into her usual chair in my office area. "Quietly. Harold's doing well, Leah's adjusting to the new normal, and Jovie's learning to live within her actual means instead of her assumed inheritance." "Any regrets about how things played out?" I considered the question seriously. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Eleanor made choices 26 years ago that led to all this pain. I regret that Jovie chose money over marriage, but I don't regret refusing to let their choices define my worth." Speaking of worth, I heard through the legal community that Eleanor made one final attempt to buy your silence last month. She offered me $750,000 to sign a statement questioning the accuracy of the genetic testing. Apparently, she'd found a lawyer willing to argue that DNA evidence from archived medical samples might be contaminated or mishandled. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that my integrity wasn't for sale at any price. Then I suggested she use that money to get counseling and learn how to build relationships based on honesty instead of deception." Yolanda laughed. "I bet that went over well." "About as well as you'd expect." "But Yolanda, here's the thing. I realized that Eleanor still doesn't understand what she did wrong. She thinks this whole situation is about money and legal technicalities. She doesn't grasp that it's about fundamental honesty in human relationships." Some people never learn that lesson. No, they don't. But their failure to learn doesn't obligate me to enable their continued deception. We were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into my parking lot. Through the office window, I could see Harold getting out of his sedan, followed by Leah and a woman I didn't recognize. "Looks like you have visitors," Yolanda said, gathering her things. "I'll let you handle your family business." Harold introduced the woman as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a family counselor who specialized in helping families navigate complex relationship transitions. Apparently, he'd been working with her to process the emotional impact of learning that his entire adult life had been built on lies. "Porter," Harold said, "I wanted to talk with you about something Dr. Mitchell and I have been discussing. It's about Leah and how we can best support her through all these family changes." We settled into my office area, and Dr. Mitchell explained that she'd been working with Harold to understand how the family deception had affected everyone involved, including people who weren't directly responsible for creating the lies. "Leah is remarkably resilient," Dr. Mitchell said, "but she's also trying to navigate relationships with family members who've been dishonest with each other for decades. She needs adults in her life who can model healthy relationship patterns." "What does that look like practically?" I asked. "It means continuing to be honest with her about what happened, supporting her relationships with family members who've earned her trust, and helping her understand that she's not responsible for fixing the problems that adults created." Harold nodded. "Dr. Mitchell has been helping me understand that my anger toward Eleanor, while justified, can't be the foundation for rebuilding my relationship with Leah. She needs to see that it's possible to move forward without being consumed by resentment." "What about Jovie?" I asked. "That's more complicated," Dr. Mitchell admitted. "Jovie is dealing with the loss of her assumed identity, her financial security, and her family relationships all at once. She's also trying to rebuild her relationship with Leah while processing her own feelings about learning that Harold isn't her biological father." "Is she making progress?" Harold answered. "Some. She's been attending counseling sessions with Dr. Mitchell, and she's starting to understand how her choices affected other people. But it's a slow process." "What does she want from me?" "Nothing, actually," Harold said. She asked me to tell you that she doesn't expect forgiveness or reconciliation. She just wants you to know that she understands why you did what you did." That surprised me more than I expected. For months, I'd been prepared for continued attempts at manipulation or reconciliation. Acceptance of consequences was the last thing I'd anticipated from Jovie. "How do you feel about that?" Dr. Mitchell asked. Relieved, I think. I was prepared for more drama, more attempts to negotiate or manipulate the situation. Acceptance feels like progress. "It is progress," she confirmed. "For everyone involved. Harold is learning to build new relationships based on truth instead of maintaining old ones based on lies. Jovie is learning to take responsibility for her choices instead of blaming circumstances. And you're learning that standing up for yourself doesn't require destroying other people, just refusing to be destroyed by them." After they left, I spent the evening working on the Barracuda and thinking about how dramatically my life had changed in less than a year. A year ago, I was married to a woman who saw me as an obstacle to her preferred lifestyle, living in the shadow of a family that considered me an unwelcome addition to their social status. Now, I was single, financially independent, and surrounded by people who valued honesty over convenience. My relationship with my daughter was stronger than it had ever been. I'd gained an unexpected friendship with Harold, and my business was thriving. Most importantly, I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by other people's willingness to pay for my absence. It was determined by my willingness to stand up for truth, even when that truth was inconvenient for people with more money and social power than I had. The Mustang I'd been working on for months was finally ready for its test drive. I'd rebuilt the engine, restored the interior, and painted the exterior a deep blue that reminded me of sky after a storm. It wasn't perfect. There were small imperfections that only I would notice, but it was honest, functional, and built to last. As I drove through town that evening, windows down and engine purring, I realized that rebuilding my life had been a lot like restoring that car. I'd had to strip away everything that was damaged or deceptive, rebuild the foundation with quality materials, and put it back together based on what actually worked instead of what looked impressive from the outside. The result wasn't perfect, but it was real. And after 15 years of living with beautiful lies, real felt like the greatest luxury of all. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by certified mail to my shop. The return address showed Eleanor Kincaid's apartment, and my first instinct was to throw it away unopened. But curiosity won out over caution, and I found myself reading what turned out to be the most honest communication I'd ever received from my former mother-in-law. "Porter," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me, and I'm not writing to ask for anything. I'm writing because I've spent the last year in therapy trying to understand how I became someone capable of the choices I made, and I think I owe you an explanation. 26 years ago, I made a decision to lie to Harold about Jovie's parentage because I was terrified of losing the life we'd built together. I convinced myself that the lie was protecting our family, but the truth is that it was protecting my comfort and status. When I offered Jovie money to divorce you, I was making the same mistake again. I saw you as a threat to the image I wanted our family to project, and I thought money could solve the problem without anyone having to confront uncomfortable truths. I was wrong about everything. About you, about what family means, about what really matters in life. You were never the problem, Porter. I was the problem, and I spent decades creating bigger problems to avoid dealing with the original one. Harold is happier now than I've seen him in years. Jovie is learning to build a life based on her own efforts instead of inherited advantages. Leah has adults in her life who model integrity instead of deception. I lost everything because I chose lies over truth, money over relationships, and image over reality. You kept everything that mattered because you made the opposite choices. I wanted you to know that I understand the difference now. I also wanted you to know that Jovie and I both recognize that you could have handled this situation in ways that would have destroyed us completely, but you chose justice over revenge. Thank you for that. And thank you for refusing to let our lies become your truth. Eleanor. I read the letter twice, then filed it away in my desk drawer. It didn't change anything about what had happened, but it confirmed something I'd hoped was true, that people could learn from their mistakes, even when the consequences were severe. That afternoon, Harold stopped by with news that Eleanor had decided to move to another state where she had distant relatives. She wanted to start over somewhere that her past mistakes wouldn't define every social interaction. How do you feel about that? I asked. Relieved, Harold admitted. I wish her well, but I'm not ready to rebuild a relationship with someone who lied to me for 26 years. Maybe someday, but not now. What about Jovie? She's doing better. Her new firm offered her a partnership track position, and she started dating someone, a teacher who doesn't care about her family's money because she doesn't have any family money anymore. I laughed at that. Think she's learned her lesson about choosing partners based on financial potential? I think she's learned that financial potential means a lot less than personal character. It's a lesson I wish she'd learned 20 years ago, but better late than never. As summer turned to fall, my life settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and authentic. The shop was busy enough to be profitable, but not so busy that I lost time with Leah. Harold and I had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience. Jovie and I maintained a cordial co-parenting relationship that focused on Leah's needs rather than our past conflicts. Most surprisingly, I'd started dating someone, a woman named Lisa who owned a bookstore downtown and appreciated both my mechanical skills and my commitment to honesty in relationships. She knew the whole story of my divorce and the Kincaid family scandal, and her response had been, "Good for you for standing up for yourself." One evening in October, while Leah was doing homework at the kitchen table above my shop, she looked up from her textbook and asked, "Dad, do you think you'll ever get married again?" "Maybe," I said honestly. "If I find someone who wants to build something real together instead of trying to change me into someone I'm not." "Like Lisa?" "Maybe like Lisa. We're taking it slow and seeing what develops." "Good," Leah said, returning to her homework. "You deserve someone who appreciates what you have to offer." I looked at my daughter, now 16, wise beyond her years, and completely comfortable with the new reality of our family structure, and realized that the best thing to come out of my divorce wasn't the vindication or the justice or even the restored integrity. It was the opportunity to show my daughter what it looked like to stand up for yourself without tearing down other people, to choose truth over comfort, and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial advantage or social status. The Kincaid family's $1 million offer had been intended to remove me from their lives, but it had actually removed their lies from mine. And that, it turned out, was worth far more than money. Outside, the first snow of winter was beginning to fall, covering the world in a clean white blanket that made everything look fresh and new. I had work to do, a daughter to raise, and a life to build based on truth instead of deception. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I wanted to be.